Let's jump into slide one. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk
Oh, me
to
too.
all of you today. I love procurement, and you can I think you will tell. Hopefully, you will come away from this loving procurement as much as I do. All right, let's talk about procurement. Now is the greatest time to be in procurement. This is my premise. There is no other function that is great, that is better than procurement right now. And so let me explain. In the late 1990s, procurement was founded, maybe in the early 90s, but in general, we grew out of a desire to manage our external spend, to put constraints about where an enterprise spends its money. And so this was marked by 3 bids and a buy. And eventually in the 2000s, oops, wrong direction. In the 2000s, we added total cost of ownership, which factored in cost and warranty and shipping and all these other mechanisms. But now we are moving into value orchestration, which means we are creating value for the enterprise through management of our third parties. And so let me bring that to life. On this page, 1, 2, and 3 are really what procurement's going to do for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And that's facilitating innovation, facilitating resiliency, and ESG, governance, sustainability, diversity, and the like. So 1, 2, and 3 are what is historically been known as supplier relationship management. And this is what we mean by value orchestration. We need to we need to manage all of this because 1, 2, and 3 have to do with third parties or suppliers. This is the external entities that every enterprise works with. This is great. This is really, really exciting because the greatest risks to any enterprise come through the third parties. And the greatest opportunities for ESG come through third parties. So basically your suppliers. But to do 1, 2, and 3, we need to get really good at 4 and 5. And 4 is new talent, new ways of working, understanding basically all things digital. Because 5 is when we embrace digital, we get hyper efficient and we start to generate intelligence that allows us to do 1, 2, and 3. So 1, 2, and 3 are our objectives, and 4 and 5 are how we're going to do that. And so we have to get really good at digital. And so this is how the evolution of procurement is going to go. It's already underway for many enterprises, where we do a lot of tactical and operational procurement today, which means we do a lot of contract negotiation. We do a lot of sourcing. We do a lot of inefficient sourcing. We do a lot of managing POs and making sure invoices get paid. We do a lot of requisitioning or managing or interjecting into the requisitioning process. But increasingly, we need to do more strategic procurement. And strategic procurement is what I said are 1, 2, and 3 on the previous page: resiliency, ESG, innovation, advanced partnerships. And so that's the goal. And digital competency allows us to move from the left to the right. That allows us to The innovations in digital allow us to not have to do the tactical and operational. And that's why procurement is so exciting right now. And you'll see this in a moment, that we have these capabilities that are so much more advanced than the way we used to do procurement. And everything I'm talking about has happened in the last couple of years. In fact, we've done more to digitize procurement in the last 2 years than we did in the previous 10 years combined. And that's pretty amazing. So let's talk about digital procurement because I've just said it's important. So let's talk about exactly how we do digital procurement. So this is a representation of all of the major procurement capabilities that we need across any procurement organization. And you can see them: supplier relationship management, sourcing, contracting, data management, all of them. And and the Harvey balls represent industry-wide adoption of these capabilities. Now, I can cut this by particular geographies. I can cut this by particular industries, but in reality, this is an aggregated view across the globe, across all industries. And you can see that in several areas we are not doing terribly well, and especially around data management and supplier relationship management. And that's important because if we're going to be value orchestrators and do innovation and resiliency and ESG, the one thing we need is really good data management. To do really good or to do really good supplier relationship management, we need good data management. We also need to get really good at spend visibility and contracting. And actually, those two dimensions are going backwards in terms of capability. So we have a lot of work to do to increase our digital competency. And then I also want to talk about digital experience, because you'll look and you'll see it's zero. Like, we are not doing good digital experience for our end user. And that's whether it's a supplier, whether it's a requisitioner, or even just a procurement buyer. So we have to get significantly better at bringing a modern user experience to the end user. And so we live in a world with iPhones and Android devices that are very smart, they're very intelligent, they're very intuitive. And we also have Amazon and Facebook and Google and Netflix that use intelligence to manipulate our behavior. So we need to use those same concepts and that same intelligence to influence the behaviors of our users. And so we need to manage this in a way that is much more sophisticated than we have, because every enterprise is sorry, let me try that again. Every enterprise uses some form of portal technology, of punch out system, of catalogs, and those technologies were developed in the 1990s. They are not nearly as relevant. In fact, they're not really that relevant in today's modern technology landscape. So we have to move significantly beyond where we were today, where we were to where we are now today. So I came up with this theory a few years ago that said we need to get really good at procurement. If we're going to get really good at procurement, we need a platform approach. The Salesforce for procurement was what I termed it. And so this is what I used to show. This is the view in 2019, where I said we'd have some central platform in the middle and a lot of different point solutions plugging into this. And over the course of the last 3 years, this view has merged into this view. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, I'll have a view of this coming out hopefully next week that's even more complicated than this, which basically details out what we need. And this slide is somewhat deliberately overwhelming. And it is because I want you can ignore all the logos for a moment, and we can talk about the actual labels. And basically, each of the labels, what I've done is I've taken the procurement value chain and I deconstructed it. And I've identified all the capabilities that we need, all the digital capabilities we need. And so instead of having one sourcing tool, which is how we used to do it, we need 5 sourcing tools or 4 sourcing tools or 6 sourcing tools. Instead of one risk tool, we need 7 or 8 risk tools, because the way we do financial risk is different than the way we do cyber risk, which is different than the way we do reputational risk. So we have to bring all of this together, and we need to bring it together into a platform. And so that's what you see in the middle. And sorry about that. So we have to bring it into a platform approach. And again, I'll use the Salesforce analogy of a singular platform that has a common user experience, that has an app store, that allows you to onboard and offboard technologies. It has a data foundation where we have all of our supplier information, and that we have intelligence. And we have intelligence that comes from all of the data generated by all of these applications. And so this is the level of sophistication that we need. And we are starting to get, you can see that there are logos that are entering into the center platform. And there's a lot more to go, a lot more effort that needs to be done there. Now, I will leave time at the end for questions, so you don't have to worry about, like I'm sure this question, this slide always gets questions. So hold the questions or put them in chat, or somehow we'll get them to me and I will answer them. But essentially, what this is the level of capability and sophistication we need in procurement, and we haven't had this historically. So this is a real skill change, or step change in our skill set. Now, so that leads us into, now, if you take all the labels on the previous slide, I have cleverly put them together here for you on a single slide to allow people to set up roadmaps and to do phasing of the different capabilities. And so if you look at the light purple, that's short-term needs. The slightly darker purple is medium-term needs, and then the dark purple is long-term needs. Now, the beauty of this slide is that you can mix and match. You don't have to follow this. This is just my view on it. But you can see all of our functional areas, whether it's procurement enablement, sourcing, contracting, risk management, all the way across. And then you build your roadmap based on these capabilities and based on your existing capabilities. There are probably gaps. Maybe you have a really good sourcing tool, so you don't need to do sourcing right now, but you need to do better accounts payable or invoice management. And so that's the beauty of this slide, is that it tells us where we need to get very precise in the capabilities that we need to develop and deploy. Now, I like to use contracting, and it's the fifth one over from the left. And what I like to point out is that a traditional best practice on contracting is to put in a contract repository and then set up contract lifecycle management, which is setting workflows, which is setting thresholds, which is setting approvals. And those are all really good things to do, except they're very time consuming. They cost a lot of money and they deliver no value to the business. So if we want to focus on creating value for the business, and if we want to actually create value for the business around resiliency or ESG, then I want to take all of my contracts and put them in a repository and then start to do analytics on the contracts. And I want to go through and understand what risk lives in my contracts. What are the variations in my contracts? What are the different types of payment terms that I have in my contracts? Because that is actually creating value for the business. And yet most quote unquote best practices don't follow that methodology. They spend time on non-value creating activities such as contract lifecycle management. And that's the change that I really want everybody to walk away with, is we don't have to do the things we've been doing the way we've been doing them in the past. Those ways of working don't help us in the middle of a pandemic. Those ways of working do not help us in the middle of a crisis. And they sure do not help us in the way we are going to build 21st century businesses, and more importantly, 21st century supply chain. So we have to get much more nimble or much more agile in how we think about our capabilities and we deploy them. And so I just want to remind you of this slide. This slide is really complicated and it's overwhelming. And these are all the capabilities that underpin that slide. But that's an interesting discussion for all of us here right now. but our end users don't care about any of that. And so what I want to suggest is that we will know we will have succeeded when we can take all of that complexity and distill it down into something very, very simple for the end user, very much like a procurement operating system that is as simple as operating an iPad or an Android device. And so what this is doing is it's eliminating all that complexity and it's making a very simple interface for the end user. And if you read my book, and I'm happy to send people copies of my book if you reach out to me, is I've put two screenshots of chatbots that actually bring this concept to life. Both are requisitioning examples. And in the first one on the left, I know you're not going to be able to see it on the screen, so I'll tell you what's happening is you have a requisitioner that's asking the source bot, an automated chat bot, that says, I need a new laptop. And the source bot asks, what brand do you want? And then it suggests that most users select Apple or Lenovo. So already that chat bot has used some sort of intelligence to guide me to the to at least the part of an outcome. It's narrowing the field down to two. And then the requisitioner says, well, what models do we have? And the source bot brings back four models, which is, again, the source bot or the chat bot is doing the heavy lifting and not making the user do a search and go sifting through 10, 20, 100, 200 results. And so then the user, like any good user, switches and says, well, wait, I'd like an iPad. So the source bot immediately flips and says, well, here are the two options that we have pre-negotiated. And so then the requisitioner says, well, I'll take the iPad Pro. And the source bot says, would you like a smart keyboard with it? Because the chatbot knows that every user before this one has, when they selected an iPad, they bought the keyboard with it. So why would you not make the recommendation and save the user a lot of frustration? Because the user is probably going to forget to ask for it. And so this is how we use intelligence to change the requisitioning process, to change the procurement process. And if we just stop for a moment and think about the governance around this, we are allowing the end user, the requisitioner, to have a very good user experience, and all within the constraints and boundaries of our pre-negotiated contracts, the bundles that we have already pre-negotiated with our suppliers that we know that are in stock. We're not going to show the user anything that's not in stock or not available within a short window. And all of this is happening in the background, and that the user doesn't have to think about. And procurement doesn't have to be in the middle of this. We have designed the factory. We do not need to work on the factory floor, to use that analogy. And so this is really the sophistication we have to get to, because today, by comparison, what we do is we make the user search and actually find the right catalog and then search and search and search and search. And so it's a very frustrating experience. But here, by asking a couple of very smart, intelligent, dynamically created questions, I can get the user on their way in a very happy way. I'm not going to go through the other script on the right, but it's I can send the slides afterwards. But you can start to see how sophisticated this is happening. And the takeaway for everybody in the audience is this is procurement's job, is to design this for the requisitioner, to design this whole workflow with intelligence. And that's why procurement's so great. This is not about analyzing spend data. We don't need to do that anymore. This is about architecting a system that allows the end user to operate like this. And this is one of many reasons why I think now is the greatest time to be in procurement. Okay, so moving on a little bit. So we have all of this technology and we have all of these startups. There's over 4,000 startups and billions of venture capital funding going into the startups, including Linkana, and others. So, how do we make sense of this? And even there's more startups and more innovation than even I can keep track of. And so, we've partnered with Procure Tech 100. There's other companies too, but the point I want to make here is that we all have to get more aware and understand all of these different solutions that are out there, because new solutions come every day. And so this is very exciting and a lot of fun to understand and study this market. And so I would encourage you to get connected with ProcureTech or Procurement Foundry or Digital Procurement World. There are a lot of uh, various organizations out there that are tracking this market. And so it's a lot of there's a lot of information, but there's a lot of innovation. There is so much procurement innovation. And when you look at what's happening on the commercial side of any organization, there's not a whole lot of innovation happening on that side anymore. All of that, Salesforce did all the innovation in the early 2000s. And so now it's time for procurement to get become innovative. Now, speaking of innovation, one of the problems that most enterprises have is that they get stuck into this mindset of daily operations. We have a crisis, we need to solve it. We have this end of year objective, we have to solve it. But what they don't do is create room for innovation and bringing on all this innovation. How do we bring in all this innovation? So, what has come to pass is the development of what's called a procurement garage or a digital garage. If you read my book, I did a case study on British Telecom that that set up this procurement garage, which is just basically an innovation center dedicated to procurement. It's dedicated to looking at all the innovation in that I was just talking about and bringing it into the enterprise in a safe way, in a compliant way. And what you might get is a number of startups that come into the procurement garage. You do test and learn, you try them out, you work with the business to see if this is a solution worth implementing. And then after you have successes, and you will have a lot of failures too, that's part of the process. In fact, you'll have more failures than successes, and that's a good thing because you're developing organizational learning and organizational muscles for dealing with innovative startups. Then, oops, going back, sorry, hit the wrong button. So once you have this coming in, then you're able to effectively and safely bring new innovative startups into the enterprise. And once the startups go through the garage, then they can get handed off to IT and the systems integrator for large scale deployment and implementation. So this is a great way of getting competitive advantage, upskilling quickly, because and really driving value in those areas that I lined out at the beginning. Because when we put startups into the innovation garage, we measure time to value in 3 to 6 weeks, not 3 to 6 months or 3 to 6 years. So the time to value is very quick, and it's very clear, it's very clear immediately if this is a value creating solution. All right. Now, you don't have to take my word for it, though, because there are many companies that are leading the way in this. And if you follow Digital Procurement World, the big conference was a couple weeks ago. You can see that J&J was there talking about their digital garage. British Telecom is frequently talking about their procurement garage. Roche talks about this. Novartis talks about this. Another large pharma company that we work with, Mars, is doing this. All of these major companies and dozens more that I can't list out publicly are doing this. And it's very exciting. These folks are doing the innovation that I'm talking about. They're working with the startups that I'm talking about. And then they're getting on stage and they're talking about it. And this is unheard of in procurement. I can't think of another time in my 22 years in this profession where so many companies have talked about this so openly and really to the benefit of everybody. And J&J, Roche, and Novartis exchange notes. They do it very readily, and that's good. And they do with the other pharma companies as well, because that's what we need in this new era. We're in an era of information sharing, and we're moving beyond the four walls. And I think this is a really, really important development. All right. So moving on. So again, you don't have to take my word for it. You can go watch the videos from Digital Procurement World and really see this in action. And so to bring all of this together, my real fundamental argument is that digital and agile approaches to organizations is forcing us to redesign our operating models, our op models, because the way we implement our procurement strategies, well, first of all, our procurement strategies come from the board level now. It's reduce carbon, it's reduce risk, it's increase resiliency, it's improve bottom line, it's increase top line growth. All of these objectives are board level objectives. And guess what? Procurement gets to work towards those objectives, because we're going to meet those objectives through our third parties, through our suppliers. So procurement is right at the middle of that. And I like to say that procurement is no longer an order taker to the business. We are an equal part of the business. We don't have to ask for our seat at the table. We are at the table because we are at this nexus between the board level strategy and those third parties. But also, with all this technology, we get to redesign our processes, because many of our processes are 15, 20, 30 steps and very complicated and convoluted, with handoffs from one system to another. And what that creates is complexity. But in a digital era, we can redesign all of our processes. You can't put in 21st century tools on 20th century on processes. Or to say it a different way, you can't put tomorrow's digital solutions on top of yesterday's processes. And so we have to change our processes, which allows us to do better governance. And I know a lot of you have different governance constraints. Better to use digital solutions than people to do governance. And speaking of people, our people and our capabilities have to fundamentally change. We have to upskill, not just the digital people, but everybody. Because when we talk about data management is an everybody problem. It is not the data management group. It is everybody's problem. And digital solutions are everybody's, not problem, but they're everybody's opportunity to work with. And so we have to upskill our people. And so I've kind of alluded to this. Procurement today on the left is buyers, it's category experts, it's supplier managers. It's the operational and tactical pieces I was talking about at the beginning. It's the work that we can no longer do. And the stuff on the right, we can call it one thing. It's value orchestration. It's pulling all these pieces together. It's, as I've said a few times, it's resiliency, it's ESG, it's innovation, it's top line growth. This is what it means to be value orchestrators. And that's what procurement of tomorrow is. Now, of course, the problem is that procurement of tomorrow requires the skills of tomorrow. And we look at the skills that we train people, they are yesterday's skills. Everything, and I know this is going to be hard to read, but we teach people on project management and industry analysis and creating category plans and category management processes or supplier relationship management. Those are yesterday's skills, because in a digital world and in a world full of digitally based intelligence, we are able to create category strategies automatically and in response to changing market conditions. So why would I teach somebody how to set a category strategy once a year when that category strategy could be changing on a daily basis? And so we need to change the skills that we teach people. And the ones in dark purple, the conflict resolution or the strategic alliances, those are good skills, but even those are need a new set of skills because those are today's skills, but they're not tomorrow's skills. Tomorrow's skills are ones that are digitally enabled. And it's going, I alluded to this earlier when we talk about data. Data is an everyone problem, and we should have a love of data. We should want to make all of our data as clean as possible, and we should also want and get as much access to data as we can. The place that most traditional enterprises fail is that they do not disseminate data or access to data effectively. That's the real difference between a Facebook and an Amazon and a Netflix and a whatever old school enterprise, is that they silo the data and they keep people out, which is not an effective way to run a business. And so once we get the data, we have to ask the right questions of the data. We have to, we call this business athlete, but understand how the data could be applied. How could I take my spend data and do something with it? How can I influence the business to do something different? Again, it's back to, if I have a seat at the table, what am I bringing to the table? And the answer is data. I'm bringing data to the table. I'm bringing analysis about the suppliers we're working with, how our suppliers are performing, or what suppliers I could be using. And so this gets at the kinds of skills we need. We need to be able to operate in a visual literacy environment. 79% of all internet traffic is visual media or visual content, which means collectively as a global society, we are moving into an image-based, visual-based modes of communicating. So that means we need visual literacies. And so this is a change that we need to move beyond PowerPoint. And in some cases, we need to even move beyond Word documents, because we have to be good at short form writing. We have to be good at short form writing. Think of 150 characters or less, that type of writing. So these are the modalities that we need to change and get behind. And the problem is you can't be trained on this stuff. You have to create a culture and an environment that allows for these skills to be developed. So don't buy a learning management system, because that won't help you. And so this is about how to create an environment for digital. And so we have to ask, how do we motivate our employees? How do we give them the tools that they need? Not the tools that are approved, but the tools that they need. And how do we build the social connections where people are sharing within the organization, and as I mentioned a moment ago, outside the organization? How do we change our job descriptions? Because the jobs we recruit for are not the jobs that we actually need. Most of our jobs that we recruit for are all those gray skills on the previous slide. But we want people that understand data, that love data, that understand the whole of the business. We need to create projects that motivate people. We need a culture of experimentation and of fear, or we have to de-risk fear. We should not fear failure. And this is another difference between traditional companies and the traditional companies and the new age companies like Google and Facebook and the like. Is in those companies, there's not a fear of failure, but in every enterprise company, there's this huge culture of fear. And the problem with that is fear of failure makes us not take chances. And when we don't take chances, we don't move the needle on anything, because all we're trying to do is self-preservation, not actually advancing, our objectives. And the real problem with that, of course, is that we learn by failing. We learn not to touch the hot stove because we touch it and we burn our finger and we say, I'm not going to do that ever again. And so that's what we have to do. We have to eliminate that fear of failure. And again, enterprises are not good at this. And then, so that's skills, that's sort of digital. And I just want to sort of start to wrap up and get towards the end here by talking about what comes next, because I've talked about that risk and resiliency and ESG and innovation are coming through our third parties. But if you are not careful, most of your third parties, most of your suppliers hate you. They just don't tell you that. And so we really have to start talking about supplier experience management. And let's really talk about this, because what happens is we think putting in a supplier portal is best in class. And so what we do is every enterprise creates a supplier portal. And so if I create my own company, we'll call it Eloise's Data Science Company. If I go to, if I get onboarded with pharma company number one, let's just say J&J. If I onboard with J&J, I have to go to their supplier portal and I have to input all my information. And then if I get a contract with GSK, I have to go to GSK's portal and enter all my information there. And then if I get Roche and Novartis, and then I get Jaguar Land Rover, and then I get Ford, and then I get on and on and on. Guess what? I'm just constantly updating my information into each of these portals, which seems horribly inefficient. But that's not all. If that's all it was, that would be okay. But the moment I sign on as a supplier, of course, every enterprise wants to know more about me. They want to know if I pose a risk to their organization. They want to know what my carbon footprint is. They want to know that I'm not doing forced labor. And so they start sending me many questionnaires with 10, 20, hundreds of questions. And so very quickly, I have to fill this out for J&J, I have to fill it out for GSK, and on and on and on. As a supplier, especially a small supplier, I get overwhelmed quickly. And that seems particularly silly in today's world. And so what I advocate for is what I would call the LinkedIn for suppliers, where we bring all of the supplier information into a single record and can be housed by a third party. And then that record gets syndicated or pushed out to each of the transactional systems, so that I answer the risk questions once. And if you want to transact with me, these are the risk questions that I answer once. And if you want my, whatever information on where all my offices are or where all my plants are, then that information is housed in one place. Because if you really want to do the value orchestration with suppliers, we need to start looking at it from their perspective. And we need to, what I call, is provide them a delightful, easy to use way to transact with any company's procurement systems. Because as a supplier, I'm motivated by two things. I want to get paid and I want to get more work. Everything else, all those questionnaires, all those risk questionnaires, ESG questionnaires, whatever questionnaires, those are important for you, but they're not important for me. And so what I want to get at is we need to be able to consolidate a singular place for all of these things, so that we can start to pull this information together more efficiently and effectively for all parties. Because even the enterprises themselves are not doing a good job at collecting this information individually, one-on-one with suppliers. And they do an even worse job of collecting it across industries. And so that's why we need new solutions to be in the middle of this. And if you really want to bring this point home, if you really want to understand just how painful this is, if you work for an enterprise, log into your systems as a supplier. That can be a very illuminating experience, because you will find out just how painful it is and how many different systems you have to log into, or where there are gaps in information that if you didn't know, you wouldn't be able to do anything with the company. And if that's not painful enough for you, then I would encourage you to onboard yourself as a supplier in your systems, because that alone is a onerous process, a super difficult process, and it's painful as painful gets. And so this is why what really means to design really smart and intelligent systems. And so I'm going to conclude here, and then I'll open up for questions if that's technically possible. I didn't check that in advance. But what I want to say is that you can hopefully start to see why now is the greatest time to be in procurement, because we have all these digital technologies that are being developed for us. They're not being developed for HR or finance or other functions. They're being developed for us. And we have all of these competencies that we are going to get to learn and do and adopt with this technology. And it's going to make us more efficient, and it's going to make us not have to negotiate contracts and go back and forth sending emails, negotiating a last minute deal. That's no longer going to be what we do. We're going to really start to look at how we can work with suppliers to make them more resilient, which makes us more resilient. That's fun work. Working with our suppliers to reduce their carbon footprint. That's work that feels good. And it's also allowing us to talk to innovative companies, not just in procurement, but if we can understand supply markets and innovations in supply markets, then that we get to influence our business in ways that procurement as a function has never done. And so taken together, we are in a new age of procurement. The idea that we are cost savings or shadow budget control, those days are over. We are now value orchestrators that are equal parts of the business. And so I'm excited for the future of the profession, and I hope you are too.